What is green building and why is it good for Ojai? That's the question, Pat. That's the question. So, it's about sustainability, it's about the climate, and the built environment. So when we're talking about green building, we're talking about the built environment. Now that can be bridges, roads, buildings. It's anything that's basically a structure. It can be the sewage systems, it can be the utilities, the transmission of energies. That is a built environment. So green building starts out in one area and then it pretty quickly gets pretty broad into all these other categories. And so I think the best way for me to explain what is green building and why is it good for Ojai is to kind of do some history, because when I started in construction, the progression is kind of like parallel with green building that happened, green building and environmental issues. And so, having said that, I'll start out with in 1969 when I was in Ventura High School. There was the Great Flood, if anybody was here and remembers that. And the reason I bring that up is because after that they created the watershed district and they analyzed the situation. They ran out there and they started figuring out different ways to build things. So we started having some pretty significant changes to the building codes to deal with flood issues. And so part of any green building is we have to adhere to codes. And flooding is part of our climate. Green building also has to address the issues of region and climate. And so no region is the same, no climate is the same, and even here in Ojai we got different microclimates. And we've got here in Ojai, for example, we've got what I think we could call our particular climate is, well, we've got fire, we've got flood, we've got earthquake, mudslides, drought. These are all climate conditions that we have to deal with. So in 1970 I started working in construction, and then 1973 full-time. And in that year there was the CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, and that's quotes to develop and maintain high-quality environment now and in the future, and take all action necessary to protect, rehabilitate, and enhance the environmental quality of the state. So this was back in 1970, and that's when you hear about these EIR reports, that's the heart of it, comes out of that, the environmental impact reports. And on the federal level, they developed the NEPA, National Environmental Protection Act, and that was signed by Richard Nixon. And then 8 years kind of goes by as they're sorting this stuff out, and then California creates the Title 24 energy codes for residential and non-residential buildings. And the new energy building codes become required to get a permit. So the codes go up a bit, and this is mostly in relations addressing energy. And this is when wall and ceiling insulation became required. And I remember when I would hear the grumbling, that's going to drive up the cost of construction, putting insulation in the walls. So that's part of it, you know. When you increase a code, you know, you're going to get resistance to change. And so in 1982, you know, about 4 or 5 years later, there's an organization called the Rocky Mountain Institute, co-founded by Hunter Lovins, and there was a 50-person membership, and they had a $7 million budget to to investigate sustainable development and work out some systems and establish some guidelines. So that was kind of the beginning of some real momentum in the environmental field in the U.S. And in 1983, the United States Green Building Council was formed as a 501c3 nonprofit membership volunteer type business, and it was to promote the sustainability in business design, construction, and operations. And so, as I said, the built environment that they were addressing has many categories, so it just didn't stop or start at houses and buildings. And then in 1994, if you guys remember, there was the Northridge earthquake. And so that has something to do with the climate. Like I'm saying earthquakes is part of our climate. I don't know why, I just like it. And it also has to do with the location. Sometimes when we're pulling a permit, they'll do studies and they investigate where the fault lines are, and that might increase the requirement of your foundation and thereby your carbon footprint. So it's always a tug of war, so to speak. And in 2000, the United States Green Building Council created the LEED. That's the Leadership in Environmental and Energy Design. It's a rating system, and it involves third-party verifications. And it's a point-based system because as they started sorting all this stuff out, the only way they could since one size doesn't fit all, they always wind up coming up with a point-based system. And it started to address every phase of the building life cycle, including the design, the construction, the operations, and the maintenance, the ongoing maintenance. And then you can earn levels of certified silver, gold, or platinum within this rating system. But it was pretty cumbersome and difficult for homeowners to go through this system, so it was quite a while before any of the LEED for Homes came about. And it was in that year, 2000, John and Marilyn Lyon hired me to design and build them a house, based on the book The Not So Big House by Susan Sukra, so I believe her name is, but I'll get to that later. And at the same time, the USGBC was coming upon the same principle that houses should be smaller to reduce the carbon footprint. Now, a lot of the members of the USGBC were designers, architects, developers, and that kind of cut into the thing, you know, of having big, large projects. And nevertheless, the USGBC stuck to their guns and started having criteria, you know, unless there was a particular function or a use or a purpose for something, you would actually lose points for it, like a big grandiose entryway or something like that, or huge timbers that were not required just for looks. In 2001, Ventura County grants the Ojai Foundation $56,000 to explore alternative, environmentally friendly buildings. That's the Ojai Foundation, you know that, in the upper Ojai, and they've ongoing program. At the same year, the city of Boulder established their green building program. I think that was the first city to establish a green building program. I wasn't aware of it then, but I got that information later. In 2002, the first United States Green Build Conference was held. It was an international conference establishing some world leadership here in the U.S. on the subject. And in 2003, Habitat for Humanity created the Ventura Green Team. And they established 21 green building categories. And I started my training and learning about insulated concrete forms as a building technique because of its durability and its energy efficiency. These are two green building criterias, looking for durability, things that last a long time and don't need a lot of tinkering, and energy conservation. And now the city of Boulder created their new home green building guidelines, and part of the developers of that was Alexia, and she came here in Ojai and Friday Club for a while. And we created that little 2020 Rotary 2020 building program. But it was interesting because I had to tell her that we copied her program that she established years ago. Then in 2004, the U.S. GBC Green Building International Conference in Portland, Oregon. That was the first one I went to. I had kind of started learning about environmental issues in buildings with the insulated concrete forms workshops in Albuquerque and whatnot. And this one I went to, the last 3 days, there's about 65 educational programs of various subjects, and at that time there was 8,000 attendees. And it was in Portland, Oregon. Now the Ventura Green team evolved into the first chapter of the USGBC C4, and that's when I joined with them in Ventura, and also became a member of the USGBC. And there was another council called the Sustainability Council of Ventura County, and it formed, and various cities around were establishing their green building programs, such as Santa Barbara, a lot of grassroots programs. Santa Barbara had the Build Green program. In 2005, I took the USGBC lead training, and for what that was worth, it was still too cumbersome for my business, which is residential building. So at 2006, the Ojai Valley Green Coalition was formed. And that year, Assembly Bill 32, if you guys are familiar with that at all, that was California's bill addressing global warming. And it's the Global Warming Solutions Act of 2006. And they were attempting to bring the carbon greenhouse gases to 1990 levels by 2020. So we're 3 years away from that. That was Governor Jerry Brown. And then there was the Green Building Convention in Denver, 3 days with 77 educational sessions and 700 exhibitors. This time we're up to 13,000 attendees, and some of the keynote speakers were becoming pretty prominent in the whole movement. One of them was David Suzuki, and he started, in listening to his speech, he talked about how it wasn't about building at all, it was about salmon, and how they go up there, and how the salmon is very important for the whole ecosystem of getting the nitrogen from the ocean up into the redwood forest, and how the flies and the bears spread that around. And so green buildings started expanding into, the whole environmental issues, and what does that mean, because the green building can't stand alone, so to speak. And at that same conference was David Suzuki and William McDonough, and William McDonough was a premier speaker and leader in the field at that time, and he created a book called Cradle to Cradle. And it's an awesome book, and it's, I remember in his talk, he was talking about, say we're in a car and we're headed for a cliff. We're going to go right off that cliff. And so he's saying, does it make a lot of sense to, instead of going 60 miles an hour, to go 40 miles an hour? So explaining how we take things, we resource them, we harvest them, we mine them, we process them, we ship them, we build them, we use them, we tear them down, and we throw them in the dump. And, or we reuse them once and then throw them in the dump. So he says that's got to end. It's got to be just like nature, where waste becomes food. And you can plan communities so you can have the waste from one industry becomes the product for another industry. And even things like capturing heat can be reused in greenhouses. So learning from nature, you know, and diversity. These are the things that they were talking about at these conventions, which was really exciting. And then the Building Science Institute was laying out how buildings are and houses. They're actually like a living source. Well, they're based on physics, and so you have to understand how that works so that they don't fail when you build them correctly. And the more complicated and sophisticated, you know, that houses are, is the more you have to pay attention to these things in the construction and the maintenance. And then in 2006, as the Title 24 standards went up again, it's set to go up. And every once in a while it goes up again, and then we as builders and code enforcers are dealing with a whole new set of criteria and rules and regulations to get a permit and to build anything. Then the movie Inconvenient Truth came out, and the public started getting involved. And in 2007, Hunter Lovins spoke here at the beginning of the Ohio Valley Green Coalition, you know, about sustainability and sustainable development of communities and houses. And in Ventura, the chapter of the United States Green Building Council was going pretty good, and I became involved in the advocacy. I was the chair of the advocacy, which is promoting, assimilating green building procedures, initiatives, codes, education. And we developed well, there was a city Ventura initiative. It was 70 pages and 14 categories, and Ojai still didn't have one. Then there was that year the Green Build Convention in Chicago, and there was 108 education sessions, 850 exhibitors, 22,000 attendees. And so this is really gaining some momentum, like the heyday, you know, things are really coming across. And California was leading the pack, leading the nation, and they developed something a little to get ahead of the curve on this for residential building. They developed the Build It Green training and certification, and I took that and became certified. And it's a point-based system, but it was ready to use, ready to go, and much less cumbersome than the United States Green Building Council. I joined the Ventura County Build It Smart advisory team, and they created that website. That's it right there. So, and they created a really good website and education, a whole system on, they called it Build It Smart because this conception of green building was like a yurt or a hut or a mud hut or something like that, a straw bale, yeah, which is fine. That's called natural building, but it reaches difficulties in complying with the building codes of California. That's for certain. And so in that project, in that Green Build It Smart website, they featured 3 of my projects as examples of smart building, green building, as they called it, build it smart. Now, California was leaving the rest of the country behind in its green building movement. And so they created their own convention, and they called it West Coast Green. And the first one I attended to, it might have been one of the first one maybe, but it was in San Francisco, and it was 3 days, and there was 126 education seminars and 256 exhibitors and 9,000 attendees. And they featured a little house called the Lotus House, which was a modular house that could be moved around as a display, and you could, it's also a housing solution type of an issue. It was built with all examples of many environmental procedures and things like that. It was pretty cool. Then in 2008, the West Coast Green again in San Jose, 3 days, 100 education, 380 exhibitors, and 14,000 attendees. So that really is picking up. Hunter Levin spoke there, Lovins, Al Gore, Jerry Brown spoke, David Suzuki, and Sarah Suzanka. That's the one who wrote the Not So Big House. It's a hard name to pronounce, but you can see why I'm doing it this way. You can see the green building movement as it goes along, and it was kind of happening at the same time I was participating in it, and with my career, if you will. And then meanwhile, the USGBC chapter in Ventura, I was on the advocacy committee, and we were working with the tri-counties, and we would have conference calls, Santa Barbara County, San Luis Obispo County, Ventura County, and we were mostly discussing how to disseminate and implement the AB 32 provision, which is the state's green building mandate measures, which were about to take effect. And also at the Ojai Valley Green Coalition, I was on the Building and Construction Committee, and we were working with the city of Ojai, and we created the Roadmap to Sustainable Ojai, which, you know, things didn't get too much traction. When it comes down to implementing these things, what can we do? We can't give a discount on permits. We can say you can go to the front of the line, but there wasn't a very big line. We could get a little plaque you could put in your front yard, you know, if you did something good, but there basically wasn't a lot of way to promote this, and so we started having these green home tours to try to demonstrate and educate the public. At this time, 25 California cities had green building programs, and now the USGBC establishes its Leads for Homes programs. And one of the things they came up with that I liked a lot was that part of the requirement, if you were to have a LEED project for a home, you would need to give the homeowner an operator's manual. And that operator's manual, it covers why green homes, how to keep your home green, emergency information, indoor pollutants, exterior structure in the envelope, interior durability finishes, lighting appliances, heating, cooling, plumbing, garage, your yard. And the thing about it is that before this all started, like way back in the beginning, the only thing you really had to do was like a light switch. You turn it on or you turn it off. And then everything that I've been talking about has changed since then. And so these houses are more involved in and that's why it's said that passive systems require active participants. And to get people to look at it this way and take part in it is a whole different story. You know, we want to just flick that switch. You know, we don't want to learn about it. We don't want to know how it works. And then, so we keep trying, and with these home shows, and the Green Coalition had some nice workshops if you guys ever attended them. For instance, like the rainwater harvesting programs and other various workshops, and year after year more and more people develop actual interests and do things on their own, and so it is pretty encouraging, but and we were making a lot of progress and a lot of interest being developed. Then comes the AB 32, which was Tier 1 and Tier 2, the green building measures from Sacramento. And this is 2008, and it was at first voluntary. But it's about to become mandatory. I mean, it is mandatory, but in 2009, it was just about to become mandatory. And at that point, it's almost like, well, we really don't have to start educating so much anymore. Wow. Because it's all going to be mandatory anyways for a lot of it. So we did a museum project, converted that into a mobile display trailer. All the cities adopted their Cal Green requirements. There was 3 or 4 home tours, Green Coalition, and I'd like to say that building science is very important. So buildings have to be designed right and built right, and universal design is very important because a home has to go through a lot of different functions so that it doesn't get remodeled and torn apart all the time. So it has to be all the various stages of people's lives, and so there's a lot of emphasis is being put on universal design now, building science, and then community planning that green building has to take in consideration is the environment, the economy, the diversity, innovation, the history of an area, and the carbon footprint of everything. And some of the greatest problems are poverty and war and culture and the lack of education. And in 2010, the United States dropped the ball. Our government, in consensus, majority consensus, has determined that climate science is unreliable and should be disregarded. And so now we've fallen to 16th place in the world as far as innovation. And so if you want to go see what's going on, it's going to be happening in other countries. And they are making some fantastic examples of eco-building and sustainability and off-the-grid. But it's not, it has to be ground level around here to make it happen. And that's why at one of these conventions, Paul Hawkins wrote a book called Blessed Unrest. And he was speaking on environmental things, and he discovered that the grassroots in all the communities, people save the river, like the Land Conservancy and organizations such like that are springing up everywhere, to protect the environment. We're doing whatever they can, and that's a very encouraging thing, and that's where it's at. So.
Thanks very much, Reg. Okay, you can tell Reg was, well, I guess there's no, was really prepared. It was an excellent presentation. Thank you very much. Again, on the what I've been doing on these talks is doing a little advertising for our speakers, whether they're ours or an outside, a non-member. And so, if you want more information about Reggie and some examples of his building, go to his website. So it's on, you can't read it from here, but I emailed it to everybody, so look on there. And then, for example, then I put it in one of his projects up here, and I picked this one out of the various ones that were shown there because I think it illustrates one thing that even I can see fits his theory, and that is there's a wide porch around at least 2 sides of this house, I assume the south and the west. and so forth to shade the house, and then that way it needs less air conditioning, right? Is that kind of the theory, or something along those lines? So, yeah, it's also a pretty compact house. So anyway, take a look at his website and see examples of his work, and you know, if you're not building a house and you've got a friend who is, or doing some remodeling work, you know, think of our good friend and member here, Reggie Wood. So thanks once again, Reggie.